All right, I think we're about ready to get started. Again, my name is MK Bozeman. I'll be helping facilitate the meeting today. We thank you for joining the Hensley Field public meeting. I believe you all should already have Mentimeter pulled up. It is menti.com, and our code will be on the screen as we get to our polling questions today. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat and remain muted until you're directed to speak. That'll help us keep things moving freely today. And I think we're ready to get started. So first up today, I'm going to introduce Ms. Julia Ryan. She's the interim director for the City of Dallas Planning and Urban Design Department. Julia.
Hi, good evening and welcome. I'm Julia Ryan, the interim director of Planning and Urban Design for the City of Dallas. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules this evening to learn about the Hensley Field project and be part of this important process. We're excited to share with you tonight the preliminary recommendations for the redevelopment and reuse of Hensley Field, the 738 former Naval Air Station owned by the City of Dallas and situated on Mountain Creek Lake. Your input will be critical to the ongoing development of the master plan that we hope to bring to City Council in the spring of 2022 for approval. Next slide. The City of Dallas views this as a once-in-a-generation opportunity to craft a plan that achieves multiple objectives related to social equity, including improved access to housing, jobs, transportation, and recreational facilities, economic development in Dallas's southern sector, and environmental stewardship, including meeting the challenge of a changing climate and the goals of the city's climate action plan. Next step. So we're a little over halfway through the master planning process. Over the last year, we've worked with a stakeholder and technical advisory group that have guided the work. During that period, we have undertaken a comprehensive analysis of the site and the opportunities and constraints related to redevelopment, the establishment of guiding principles, the development of testing a series of planning scenarios that have resulted in a series of recommendations that we want to share with you tonight. And over the next 6 months, we will be developing the master plan based on these recommendations and the input that you provide us tonight. The Hensley Field redevelopment is being led by the City of Dallas's Planning and Urban Design Department, and I'd like to take a moment to recognize our city project team, Arturo del Castillo, Don Rains, and Monique Ward. And in 2020, a multidisciplinary consultant team led by McCann Adams Studio was selected to lead the preparation of the master plan. The team members have national experience in projects of similar scope and scale, including Mueller in Austin, Stapleton in Denver, and Mission Bay in San Francisco. Tonight, the consultant team members will be leading the discussion. So they'll provide you with an overview of the site and its context, and then focus on the preliminary recommendations that the team has developed for the master plan. The recommendations are divided into 5 categories: land use and economic development, open space and public facilities, historic preservation and adaptive reuse, transportation and mobility, and finally, sustainability. The team will describe the recommendations under each of these categories and then stop to get your thoughts and answers any questions you might have along the way. And we'll wrap up with a description of our next steps and project milestones. So our goals today are twofold. Provide an overview of the progress of the Hensley Field Master Plan, and then finally hear your feedback on the initial key recommendations. Your feedback tonight is very important to the future of this plan and the site as it develops. So with that, let me introduce Jim Adams of McCann Adams Studio, who will kick the meeting off. Thank you.
Jim, I think you're on mute.
Always. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight, hearing what we have to tell you about Hensley Field. We are really excited about presenting what our preliminary recommendations to you tonight. As Julia said, this is truly a once-in-a-generation opportunity for the city to shape the future of a significant tract of land in southern Dallas. As Julia said, the city's goal is to leverage the value of the land to achieve broader objectives related to economic development, environmental stewardship, and social equity. There are some great examples of communities throughout the country using major land holdings like Hensley Field to accomplish larger goals. In Denver, just on the screen, the city transformed its old airport, Stapleton, 5,000 acres east of its downtown core, into a part of the city that had experienced disinvestment and decline. It's now a new district with parks, open spaces, housing, and a considerable amount of commercial development that has yielded jobs and reinvestment in that part of the city. Next slide. In San Francisco, a 300-acre kind of derelict rail yard adjacent to the downtown has become a mixed-use district of the city, anchored by a research and medical campus and the University of California, San Francisco. And what it did was really secured the city's national and international position as a leader in biomedical research. And at the same time, created this great mixed-use district of that city. And then closer to home in Austin, Julia mentioned this, the city of Austin, like Denver, moved its airport to a site at the edge of town and has over the past 15 years transformed the 700-acre site, very similar in scale to Hensley Field, into a new mixed-use neighborhood that is addressing economic development of Austin's east side, challenging issues of affordability, and the area's lack of open space. 25% of all the homes are part of an affordable housing program. At build out, the project will have 14,000 residents and 14,000 jobs and 140 acres of open space and parkland. So all three of these examples involved a partnership between the landowner, the railroad in the case of Mission Bay, and the municipality in the case of Miller and Stapleton, and a master developer who is working in partnership with the city to do the vertical and the horizontal and the vertical infrastructure, coordinating the entire development to ensure that the community's goals and the goals of the master plan are achieved. So Jenna McCann is going to discuss kind of the 6 principles that we've developed that will guide the master plan.
Good evening, everybody. One of the first things that we did when we began the master planning process last fall was work with our 2 advisory groups that were established then, our stakeholder advisory group and our technical advisory group, the SAG and TAG, in order to develop the sort of basic guiding framework for the plan. And so we developed 6 key areas around which we have guiding principle statements and then corresponding goals underneath each of those. And just as an example for the first one about environmental health, the statement was develop Hensley Field as a living laboratory of resilience that is a proof of concept project for Dallas's comprehensive environmental climate action plan, otherwise known as the CCAP, which is one of the critical policy plans that we as a team looked at the very beginning of this process. So we kind of analyzed all those existing policies, existing conditions and context, and developed these guiding principles that are really geared towards achieving the overall mission. So each of these principles, these 6 principles, not only work to guide the master planning process, but they will also they can be used as performance metrics once the master plan is complete and implementation begins. So to sort of do a sort of a check-in of the health of the project and the progress of the project. Slide. And then I think I'm going to turn it over to Leah Hales from SWA, our master landscape architect, and she's going to go over the site itself and its context.
All right. Thank you all for being here this evening. So as you can see, the site is centrally located within this portion of the Metroplex. Within a 11-mile radius, we are very close to DFW, Love Field, downtown Dallas, Irving, and then of course, Arlington and our southern sector cities as well. It's very centralized location, has great access to transportation. And so it's really kind of a value-driven location within the city. Next. You can see here that the site is surrounded on 3 sides by the city of Grand Prairie, and then of course Mountain Creek Lake, which to the southeast, which is a part of the city of Dallas. Next. So the size of Hensley Field is 738 acres. And when you start to look at that in comparison with other areas within the region, the Central Business District within the loop itself is 915 acres, Fair Park at 285, the Arlington Entertainment District, which includes Cowboy Stadium, the 2 Ranger ballparks, the Convention Center, Six Flags, and associated parking is 520 acres. And then Cypress Waters, which we think is a similar comparable development, is 1,450 acres. And so when you start to analyze how much land we're dealing with here, it's really an impressive amount of land for the city of Dallas to have and invest in. So the site history, you know, it had an early settler present on the site, such as the Caddo, Comanche, the Wichita, and those other tribes that existed in North Texas. We had the early pioneers that were arriving in from Arkansas, but that had land grants to create a Peters colony within the area. Dallas purchased the 280 acres in the early or late 1920s and leased it to the U.S. Army. And that began sort of the development of the area with the damming of the lake, the power plant coming into operation, the existence of the naval base, and then of course, everything that happened within the military that on this area up through the early to mid 90s before it was decommissioned in 98. So you can see in this map the context of how Hensley Field sits on this site. There was a convergence of Cottonwood Creek and Mountain Creek as they came together. When it was dammed up to create the lake and the power plant, you can kind of understand where that happened in relationship to the site. And this diagram here just shows you over a period of time how Cottonwood Creek used to flow naturally into Mountain Creek Lake in the early 40s. And as the site expanded during World War II, that connection was severed and filled in order to create a longer airstrip. And then it increased its length throughout time in order to, you know, be a training facility and a management facility throughout the wars that were existing during both World War II and Vietnam and Desert Storm, you know, extended the airfield out, and it exists that way still today. Existing on site, we still have lots of military artifacts there. We have the officers' housing, which are deemed historic. We've got between 5 and 7 different hangars, all of various scales and ages, including a historic World War II hangar, other military installation facilities, but we also have really great, interesting views across the tarmacs to Dallas Baptist University. We've got the lake itself. We've got the Cottonwood Creek area, which is very naturalized and beautiful, plus a lot of existing native plant materials. And on-site is an ongoing process of environmental remediation. The Navy is committed to and required by TCEQ to clean up the site overall, including the PFAS area, but most of the soil remediation has happened already, and there is still some remediation that's being monitored through TCEQ. And next, I believe we have Jim coming up again.
Yes. So after gaining an in-depth understanding of the site and the objectives of the city and the community with the guiding principles that Jenna described, we undertook a scenario planning process. And What does that mean? Well, what it is we developed what we thought were 3 potential outcomes or possible futures that we wanted to test and evaluate. For each of those, we developed land use programs, infrastructure, open space programs, costs and revenues were projected. And so what we did with that process was we evaluated their ability to meet the project's principles and goals and their likelihood of success in terms of their economic feasibility. Next slide. These are the 3 scenarios that we've developed. The first scenario, each of them had a hypothesis attached to it. The first scenario was that we would attract a major corporate user or institutional user to Hensley Field as a catalyst for the development. And that resulted in a program of about 5,700 residential units and 3.8 million square feet of non-residential commercial and institutional space. The second scenario was based on the idea that residential development would lead the way at Hensley Field, really taking advantage of a strong residential market and the outlook on and the adjacency on Mountain Creek Lake, really emphasizing that aspect. It resulted in 6,000 dwelling units and about 2.7 million square feet of commercial space. And the third scenario was really focused on sustainability, really looking for Hensley Field to be what we called a living laboratory of resilience, demonstration of the city's leadership in sustainability. It was the most aggressive scheme in terms of density, resulting in about 8,000 dwelling units and 5.3 million square feet of non-residential space. So what we did, and this diagram just describes the evaluation process. We looked at each of these, as I said, relative to their performance, relative to the guiding principles. We looked at their economic viability. We looked at the level of risk associated with them. And with that, we came up with a series of recommendations for what a preferred alternative should look like. And that's what we want to review with you tonight, is those recommendations. As you can see by this diagram, we aren't selecting one of these scenarios over another. We're really trying to choose what we think the most successful aspects of each were, and combining those into what will be what we call the preferred alternative and what will be the basis of the master plan. So what, as Julia mentioned at the outset, we've divided the recommendations into these 5 categories. So I'm going to speak to land use and economic development. Each of our other team members will speak to the others, and we'll introduce them as we come along. At the end of each of these categories, we're going to ask you to weigh in on what you feel about the recommendations, and we'll be able to answer any questions if anyone wants to speak specifically to any of the items associated with each of these. So in terms of land use and economic development, I want to first of all just tell you that all of the scenarios that we looked at did include a mix of land uses. That was clear from the principles and the community objectives that were established for the site. All of them were based on the idea of a mixed use live, work, play community. All of them, as I mentioned in the program, all of them having a residential, commercial, institutional component. So that's a very important aspect of all of the 3. The other aspect that's very important is that each of the scenarios and the preferred alternative that we're going to be recommending tonight will include a wide range of housing choices, a complete spectrum of rental, ownership, single family, multifamily, at a variety of price points to create a mixed income community, a diverse community that is reflective of the entire city of Dallas. We heard very strongly from our stakeholder outreach the need for a full service grocery store not only to meet the needs of the future residents at Hensley Field, but really to address the shortage of healthy food opportunities in the southern sector of Dallas and adjacent Hensley Field, an area that has been characterized as a food desert. So this will be a key goal, is attracting a grocery store to Hensley Field. So these are the 6 recommendations, and I should have pointed out earlier that the full report, the scenario evaluation report, and the full list of all of the recommendations are on the website. And we encourage you to go on hensleyfield.com and look at these. What I'm going to be summarizing here, or outlining, is a summary of the key recommendations. These are the ones relative to land use and economic development. The first recommendation is we want to reserve at least 60 to 80 acres of land along Jefferson Street, which is the northern edge of the site, for what we're calling an anchor use, or one or more anchor uses that can really provide a catalyst for the economic development of this area. The second is that we want to make sure that the master plan provides flexibility to allow for additional commercial and institutional uses. And the key goal here is to create jobs that can serve the surrounding neighbors, region, and the broader city as a whole. The third recommendation is for the city to initiate a request for interest, or a request for proposal process to gauge market interest from potential anchor users. And the city is in the process of preparing that. The idea is to issue that even before the master plan is presented to council in the spring. The fourth recommendation is that a film studio complex, as illustrated in one of our scenarios, should be considered as part of that RFI process. We have had interest expressed from the film industry to locate on the site. So that is encouraged and will be evaluated by the city for its ability to achieve the broader objectives of the project. The fifth recommendation is that 30 to 40% of all of the residents, of homes at Hensley Field should be low or medium density ownership housing. And we had one scenario 2 did that. And very importantly, that a program of mixed income housing should be incorporated to secure a diversity of housing types and to secure a level of affordability for a portion of those homes, so that we can create the kind of diverse community that the community is envisioned. And finally, and importantly, the southwest corner of this site is currently occupied by the Texas National Guard. They have a lease until 2039 for their helicopter operations. The city of Dallas and the COG are working with the Texas National Guard to relocate to Fort Worth. But we are really recommending that that initiative be accelerated because with the helicopter operations, it would really preclude redevelopment for a long period of time on the southwest portion of the site. So those are the 6 recommendations for land use. And I believe that MK is going to, or Sarah, going to ask you to weigh in on those. So the question, I guess, is, do you agree with the land use and economic development recommendations? You could say yes, they look fine. You could say generally, but you have questions or comments, and we encourage you to put those in the chat, and then we can have a discussion on what those issues are. And you could also say, no, I think these are not the right issues, and you can also put your concerns in the chat. So please weigh in.
I do want to explain for those who weren't here at the beginning, we are completing our polling exercises through menti.com, which you'll see at the top of your screen. There's also, if you go all the way back up to the top of a chat, a link directly to our poll. So that is one way to get involved with us. If you are having issues with your Mentimeter, please let us know. We can facilitate that for you. And as Jim said, if you have any additional comments or things you'd like to share, please put that in the chat. We do have a couple of questions. So Jim, if you'd like to start, we have a comment from Janice Birkeland saying it's more than close enough to the hotels or close enough to downtown Dallas hotels. But we do have a question that says, will mixed income housing apply to multifamily as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we are still in the process of developing the affordable housing program and the mixed income program. But the idea, at least the goal right now, is for it to be across the board for all housing types to have a level of affordability and access. The exact number, percentage is still being discussed and evaluated. And your input on those topics will be important. I see that there are a number of comments on that you might point to, MK.
Yes, we do have a couple of people going on the chat down this discussion of what housing is really needed and how land should be used in this area. I'm looking for more questions that we could address and discuss more as a group, or if anyone would like to share kind of their comments and have this conversation while we're finishing up polling here. I see Kenneth has asked, how is this tied specifically to the Latinx community in terms of culture and language?
I think what we've tried to do so far, and this is still a master plan, is reach out to the surrounding communities in Grand Prairie and in Dallas to get input. We've researched oral histories. Jenna, from various folks who live around the area, do you want to describe that process?
Well, we've had a pretty interesting sort of public outreach process that consists of traditional methods, which one of those is this kind of community meeting tonight, but also had some so-called arts-based engagement where we had a member of our team, Civic Arts, really sort of reached out to the community in Grand Prairie and the schools there, and actually worked on an art project with the community and the high school, and got 3 different artists from that area to work with the community and mostly like the school children and parents to create some art from that. So that's a very different kind of engagement. There was some connection certainly with the Latinx community during that, as well as the 24 or so oral histories that were gathered, and which you'll see evidence of in our master planning report. But I think there's something that's really important about this site is making sure that we tell the stories about what happened on this site, and both from yesterday's perspective when Hensley Field was a military site to today, and what are the concerns and attitudes of people around, and how do we sort of make Hensley Field a place that is culturally vibrant. So we're looking at performance spaces and things like that to help achieve that.
And Mr. Gonzalez has noted that the Bishop Arts District, I guess, for example, didn't seem to take advantage of the Latinx community. How would, if you could speak to us about what you'd like to see in terms of how we could be more responsive or better responsive than Bishop Arts was.
Yeah, can you hear me, Jim?
Yes.
Oh, great, great. Thank you for allowing me to offer some comments. So I'm new to the area. I'm the president of the Mountain View campus for Dallas College. And so I kind of always look through things through the lens of the Latino community, especially in the Mountain View area. And, I'll just give you like one example. If I tried to find where most of the Latinos, on the weekends, it's the Traders Village. And so And I'm like, okay, that's like nothing like the Bishop Arts District. And so what I'm hoping as we develop new areas that you can see that kind of representation that you see in the Traders Village on the weekends, which is crowded. I mean, oh my goodness, it's so many people, so many small little businesses. But if you have that kind of dynamic in these development areas, because when I go to like the Bishop Arts District, I don't see the representation of Latinos taking advantage of that area. And sometimes the businesses don't feel like they have embraced the culture as much as they could. And I think some of them have. And there's some representation, but it would be great to use this as an opportunity to take advantage of that. And then basically, how can this project really help address the economic conditions of the Latino community? Like 10 years after this development project is done, this is how it's improved the economic circumstances of the Latino community. If we could find ways to answer that and measure that, I think that would be fantastic. And I'm here ready to partner in any way.
All right, thanks so much for that comment. There are a number of questions or comments on housing. Would anyone like to speak to the issue of mixed income housing?
This is Diana Flores. So this is, as we all know, a huge problem for Dallas. I'm not sure about Grand Prairie, but in Dallas, the last time I looked at research, it was about 20,000 units needed of low to moderate income housing. And what needs to happen is a way to home ownership. Like if it's going to be a multi-residence building, that people not just rent, they're able to own the unit. Same thing for the houses that are built. We don't need more rentals. We need actual home ownership for these low to moderate income families, because that's the pathway to then begin to build wealth through that home equity. So we don't need to, again, make the mistakes of the past. And I'm real concerned about what's happening in Oak Cliff now. We have all of these rental units coming up, being built. And as I put in my comments, Bishop Arts was mentioned, and that's just while it's good and bad. The bad is it's displaced so many low to moderate income families, so that now you have these supposed hip urban people wanting to be urban pioneers coming back to the inner city, displacing low to moderate individuals or families. So again, Hensley Field, let's finally, City of Dallas, do it right, and let's provide home ownership to our families.
Great, thank you. And I would encourage you to continue, in the dialogue as we develop the affordable program for Hensley Field. Anyone else want to speak to the issue of mixed income housing?
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, if I could just weigh in real quickly here and kind of piggyback off the two concerns that were raised earlier. One pertaining to the Latino community in the area, and the other one related to housing availability in the area. So just a little background on me. I live over in Grand Prairie, really close to the Avion Village area, and I grew up here. Spent over 25 plus years of my life out here. As a matter of fact, my neighbor, he was in the Army and lived on that base, worked on that base his whole life when it was active in the 90s. So and my background's in economics and finance, so I could probably provide a little bit of
Edgar, I think we
that I
lost
noticed
you.
is a driving factor.
Oh, we can hear you. Keep going. Keep going.
Okay, I apologize. I am actually on the running trail at Lone Star Park, running right now, and I'm listening in. And I stopped to raise my voice here a little bit. Thank you. Anyway, one of the driving forces that I see on these developments, both on the residential and opportunities to people that live in the surrounding areas, are corporate developments. So particularly bringing in corporate environments into the area, things technology related, large corporations like that. And in the comments, I dropped Toyota's relocation to Plano and how basically there are over 4,000 employees from California relocated to that area. And if you go out to Plano, it's super nice. The spillover effects of that move into the area, it just exploded. And what it translates for the youth in the area, kids that don't have exposure to certain opportunities, because this part of Dallas is heavily industrial, a lot of warehouses, a lot of junkyards, a lot of salvage yards. So if they have, commute issues, transportation issues, and then there's a huge corporation or even a small corporation with a different type of work opportunity for them, that's going to have longer term impacts on them. Demographic changes, whether they choose to stay here in the area or move out after they go to college, invest, develop their own projects here in the area. So that's kind of my perspective, and I think that's a larger driving force in the area than it would be to just launch a bunch of residential real estate projects. Though these are all very interesting opportunities and quite a different perspective to what's on the site now.
Thank you. So I see that in the polling, there are 4 people who said they do not agree with the recommendations. Do any of you guys want to speak about the concerns that you have?
I will speak. I did not say that I disagreed. I said that I agree with, this is Anja Sanders. I said that I agree with caution. Ms. Flores says this is an opportunity for the city of Dallas to do it right. I hope that doing it right does not mean crowding in too many lower income housing developments. We are already way over our fair share of that. We need the majority of the housing in this area to be market rate or above. I have been in this fight for several years now, just trying to get decent grocery stores. And if you continue to crowd in lower income housing, and that's the majority of it, then what happens is a vicious cycle. That's what develops, because all the desirable amenities, restaurants, grocery stores, quality retail will not come or will vacate the area quickly. So, there's a lot of game playing that goes on with the city of Dallas and developers, and they'll say, oh yes, we're going to have market rate housing, but then that market rate housing turns out to be 10%, which is basically nothing. And eventually goes down. So I do hope that whatever this project turns out to be, it will be the majority market rate housing. You can lift an area by what you put in it, or you can destroy an area. I have lived in Oak Cliff for 40 years, and I have seen that with my own eyes, how my community has deteriorated, how the quality stores, retail, restaurant got up and vacated. So I would not like to see that on the west side of my community. So please be cognizant of that, because there's going to be pushback if there's not sufficient market rate housing.
Thank you, Anja. And I can assure you that, just given the economic structure of what this will look like, the majority of housing will not be low income. I think the idea is to create a diversity of opportunities, and we don't know exactly today what that percentage is, but I can assure you that it will not be a majority of low-income housing. We really are looking for a diverse spectrum of houses, and encourage you to stay involved as we develop that program.
I certainly will.
Jim, maybe you can explain a little bit about how the housing is broken down at Mueller.
Sure. So in Austin, the city of Austin had a very similar goal to create at the former airport, 700 acres, similar mixed income community. And so and we have a serious issue of affordability in Austin, as you probably know. So they set up a program that required 25% of all of the homes to be affordable for folks, and there had to be at least 40% of them is ownership and 60% in rental, and there were specific levels of affordability that were dictated. So today, as the project is about to be completed, we have $1 million homes that are next door to homes selling as part of the affordable program for $200,000. So it's a complete spectrum of homes in a community that has attracted a grocery store, has great open space, and has really enhanced the quality of life of the surrounding area that prior to the redevelopment of the airport had experienced significant disinvestment and decline. So that's a model that we're looking to emulate here in Dallas, but applying the tools that would meet the special needs of this area. So beyond, anyone else want to speak, please?
That was just me cutting you off, Jim, because okay. I'm eager to talk about the 4 other areas that we're like to get
there are other topics, and I'd like to now introduce Sarah Fitzgerald, landscape architect from SWA, who is doing a tremendous job helping us structure the whole open space character of this project.
Thanks, Jim. And for all the other presenters, there are some more questions in the chat. So while I'm kind of covering these topics, feel free to follow up with people in the chat. So as far as open space recommendations go, as Jim started out with, all 3 scenarios really worked to take strong advantage of the waterfront. Mountain Creek Lake has the potential to be an amazing amenity. It's twice the size as I always get tripped up, White Rock Lake, and could be just the key feature of making this development successful in terms of residential development. So we'll definitely be focusing this in the final master plan. Also, we want to target at least 25% of the space of the site in open spaces. So that includes parks, plazas, trails, even things like playgrounds. So having a wide variety of open space typologies for a wide variety of users. And we want to be sure to use the power of plants. So in addition to beautifying the future development, we want to hit ecological goals such as reducing the heat island effect by planting at least 40% of the site with tree canopy coverage, as well as having elements such as floating wetlands and green infrastructure that can treat most of the stormwater on the site before it hits Mountain Creek Lake, thereby improving water quality in the area. And we also want to be sure that the final master plan is really a proof of concept for CCAP, Dallas's Comprehensive Environmental Climate Action Plan. We want Hensley Field to show that it is possible to develop in a sustainable method in accordance with CCAP. So hitting the CCAP goals is going to be very important for the final master plan, and all 3 scenarios do that. And finally, as a part of the open space system, we want to be sure to have a working demonstration farm that shows how to grow food, shows the seasonality of what can grow in our North Texas climate, and also has the potential to make a real dent in the food security of this area, not to supplant a grocery store. As Jim clearly outlined, we're definitely taking that to be a central focus of getting a grocery store for this development to serve the entire area. But we also think that having a working demonstration farm on site could be an excellent amenity for future residents and nearby neighbors. So as far as preliminary recommendations go for the open space systems, like I said, we want to reserve at least 25% of the site for publicly accessible open space. So that's 185 acres or more. We also recognize that we need to make room for a Grand Prairie ISD public school. We're in contact with GPISD to determine what makes the most sense. Is it an elementary school, a middle school? And we'll be sure to vet the final location of that with GPISD. Number 3, we want to coordinate with City Office of Environmental Quality to assess the risks and benefits related to realigning Cottonwood Creek. So as Leah talked about earlier, the shape of Hensley Field has changed dramatically over time. And as you can see in this image, which demonstrates kind of a hypothetical distribution of different types of open spaces, in the very middle, where there's this blue blob and the scissors, we'd love to potentially reopen Cottonwood Creek to communicate directly with the lake, which would increase the ecological health of both water bodies, but also be a really significant social amenity to the human users of the site. So we're in close contact with the City Environmental Quality Office, as well as we have recently had meetings with the TCEQ to discuss the feasibility of recommending this in the final master plan. Number 4, we want to have blue-green infrastructure as part of the open space programming. So what that means is kind of a linear park system that could both move people and water and animals, just to be like a connective system throughout the whole site, so that stormwater can be treated before it hits the lake, and also so that people have the option to move around the site without having to be in a car. Number 5, we want to make sure that every resident and employee is within a 5-minute walk of a public open space. I think COVID has really underlined this lesson for everyone in the city shaping sphere, that it's so important to have access to open space. So we want to definitely ensure the 5-minute walk metric moving forward. And finally, we want to coordinate with the US Air Force to improve the ponds up near Jefferson Street. So in the northeast quadrant of the site, the US Air Force currently has a lease, and we think it could be really impactful to essentially re-landscape and modify some of the Jefferson frontage to change some of the perceptions of the site. So we are also in contact with them to discuss that feasibility. So as before, we'd love to know, what are your opinions? Do you generally agree with these recommendations? Do you have some questions? Are we missing some things? Feel free to use the chat, and MK can bring some of those to the surface, and also use our Mentimeter polling.
So I see in the most recent part of the chat, we have some discussion about White Rock Lake. Leah, I don't know if you want to give some context for how we're thinking about these two areas as similar.
And we also have Lori Trulson here on board that might be able to clarify about Mountain Creek Lake.
So, you know, White Rock Lake also has its level of contaminants. They have heavy metal sediments, they have E. coli issues, they have many things. That's why there's lightweight watercraft, as well as no swimming, no consumption of fish, that kind of thing out of White Rock. But still, it's a huge amenity to the city of Dallas. And when you start to think about that in the ways of how we frame how we utilize the lake, whether it's lightweight watercraft or a trail system that goes around the lake, which everyone loves at White Rock, we have essentially the potential of a half marathon in one loop around the lake here. So it's a value-driven ad, even and the views and everything else that's associated with the lake. Even if you aren't necessarily swimming in the lake, it's very similar to White Rock Lake, and it's twice the size of White Rock Lake. But Lori, feel free to answer some of these questions in the chat if you're concerned.
We may have lost Lori.
I'm here. I'm so sorry. I am here. I will definitely look. I am looking through what is coming up in the chat, and I was making note of it, but that's a really good idea. I'll start making some responses in the chat. And I agree with everything, Leah, that you just stated. And I can, of course, answer any other questions that are needed.
Does anyone want to share some context with us out loud about what they've put in the chat, or begin a discussion here as well?
I noticed there are questions about light rail. We're going to be talking about transportation in a moment.
A lot of it is, you know, the long-time perception and reality of contamination. There might be a difference there. So I raised a family in Grand Prairie. We lived there for over 20 years. My husband taught at South Grand Prairie High School. Yes, there was always this long-time perception of Mountain Creek Lake, But in reality, when you start looking at the numbers and you start evaluating what TCEQ looks at in terms of contamination and everything else, you might really be surprised at the research that goes into all of this. There are some issues with the Navy. We understand that. We know that there's isolated areas of contamination, but it's not the entire lake that's an issue. So I think that Lori will continue to answer questions because she's really on the forefront of those things. It's just a matter of how it's all interpreted.
I also noticed a question about potential of contaminated soils in reference to urban agriculture. And yes, we are very aware of that issue and will be sure to only cite recommended urban agriculture in sites that do not have soil contamination and would be far away from any potential conflicts there. We have been in conversation with a couple agricultural focus groups that have let us know, even if you're farming perennials, those roots get down really deep. So location is going to be key, and we'll be sure to, fully vet that final location.
I would like to make a quick follow-up comment regarding the issues with contamination. This is Alex Toprak from the Texas Historical Commission. I'm very, very familiar with the area and have been working with the folks next door at the Naval Weapons Industrial Reserve Plant for several years. And, there are a lot of issues with, chlorinated chemicals used at both Hensley Field and in Werp in the reservoir that were found in fish tissue samples, in the last 10 years. So I definitely understand the concerns that, have been brought up in chat. And I think that maybe the takeaway should be that the marketing of this site in relative to the amenity that is the lake needs to be carefully done in the sense that there are some very concerning issues that are still continuing to be addressed. And then also follow up to the soil contamination. I can say that next door, there has been a very large remediation effort by the developers in terms of the buildings that were removed and where Home Depot currently is and the warehouses. And otherwise, just quick tag on, I would like to see more, and this goes into the historic preservation thing a little bit, but I would like to see more kind of honoring of the flight paths, actual runways, and the actual airfield itself within the landscape design plan, because I really think that presents a really kind of amazing educational opportunity relative to what could be done with the officers' quarters and other interpretation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. I think that's actually a really good natural handoff to Jana to talk about some of our recommendations. Your feedback is definitely well taken, and I think Jana will talk to some of that.
Yeah, hi, thanks. One of the big things that when we were starting to think about historic preservation, we had a focus group, and I know there's quite a few people here today that participated in that and that are very interested in preservation. And the guiding principle that was developed for historic history and culture was, the statement was, Hensley Field will leverage historic and cultural resource management to support broader sustainability, equity, and economic goals of the project. And this is something we kind of have been working closely with the city's historic preservation office and one, just developing that overarching kind of principle, but also with, how do we get there? And one of the big things that I think we've heard loud and clear is that we need to create a clear sort of statement of significance. And so to your point, Alex, I think, the significant moment in this site is the military history, or that's the period of significance. And so we are looking at ways that we can, sort of give traces or, through landscape or even through the roadway alignments of those original runways. And actually the master plan is sort of developing using some of those as kind of the armature for the future roadways and landscape patterns. So I think that's something we want to take on board. But the big idea is how do we, preserve and celebrate this history and make it palpable to, future residents and visitors of that, because we have this incredible range of time period, starting with Native Americans and then the Anglo settlers in the 1860s. We actually have an acre full of, which is a cemetery on the site, which is very kind of unusual because it's sort of an island unto itself. And then we have a couple of really interesting and significant structures. And next slide, please. So our recommendations right now, and as I said, we're still sort of evolving these with the city's Historic Preservation Office and hopefully with Texas Historic Commission, is to first preserve and interpret the history of Hensley Field so that we can have residents and visitors really enjoy and understand what is unique about it and really sense its special identity, and really give some expression of the stories that help shape the place. And that sort of, I referred to it earlier, we have now collections of oral histories from family members who actually had connections to Hensley Field during its military time. And so it'll be what we're trying to do is really weave these stories into the master plan. One of the ideas that SWA and we are pursuing is creating this sort of a historic loop interpretive trail so that you can really perambulate the whole, site and really learn about the history at different points along this hike and bike trail. Then, it's important to stabilize and make sure that we can hang on to those few remaining structures that are still there. We have these two great examples, two officers' houses right at the entrance, the gateway to the site off of Jefferson Boulevard, but one of them has a giant hole in it in the roof. So we need to really take care to stabilize and preserve those so that they don't really deteriorate further. The third thing, and this is really what we're working on now, is working with the city's Historic Preservation Office to really understand what's important, what's significant, and how do we look at those? Are they eligible for city landmarking? And then certainly we want to look at are they eligible for sort of a National Register level listing, and develop a clear strategy for how to protect and reuse those structures, speaking primarily of the hangars and the officers' houses. So there's a lot of conversation that we've had with stakeholders, and even during our discovery tour, which was a general public bus tour of the site, a lot of people had some ideas about how we could reuse these structures. A lot of people weighed in about they wanted the officers' houses to be something that was public, that could be maybe even a military museum, or something that would be kind of a welcoming but public-oriented use. Finally, the big daddy that we have of the Dallas Naval Air Station is the biggest hangar, and it's really in poor repair, not quite as bad as the image on the top, but the image on the top is really interesting, where they just kept the superstructure and the walls and kind of created a farmer's market and an event space. And we can imagine that this hangar could be utilized in a similar way, that it could be gathering space, performance space, it could be brewery, brew pub, it could be anything that, where we really want to create a community gathering spot. So those are some of the ideas that we've looked at. So for the Mentimeter poll, Are you in agreement generally with the recommendations, or do you, generally yes, but you got questions, or no, not at all? And please let us know what your concerns are.
So not a lot of activity in the chat during that round, but we do have a question from Chuck Edwards is, can we have another round of public tours? I guess he heard about the Discovery Tour.
Yeah. Well, I would love it. I think that's kind of up to the city, but I think it was really important for people to get a feel for the site because it's been closed off and a secured site. So I think it was a great opportunity that deserves a replay on that. So, but that's a pretty big effort. So we'll have to see. Currently, it's not in our scope for the master plan, but it's certainly something that could be considered, post master plan.
We did have another question. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, it's me again. Just my last comment to chime in here, and then I'll be out of your hair. I'll keep running. So this is actually one part I was really waiting for. I remember this from the tour. This is actually really exciting because I did mention I had that neighbor that worked off the base. Sadly, he passed away early 2000s. His son's not involved in this process. I've told him about it, but he'd be really excited if the military history was kept on the site. Oh, by the way, tremendous respect for all of you who worked so hard to put this together. It looks very well researched, and also all the members of the community that are on the call. Your voice and just being a part of this process is tremendous to everybody here in North Texas. So when I look at the site and I think about it, and I think about him a lot, the history on the site, it's kind of a tumultuous period in human history, right? There's a lot of chaos, a lot of conflict going on all around the world. And what I see is this is a point where basically humanity in North America came together to solve a really, really complex problem in humanity, which is world peace, right? And out of this little field, a lot of innovations came about. We had Lockheed Martin on site, airplanes, aircraft, all pieces of technology where we all came together. And so the ability to merge that military history and keep it with, the next era, the next generation of life, technology again, workplace of the future, housing community of the future. I think all of that, to me would be capturing perfectly what I would envision, what I would like in the community that I grew up in. So I just want to throw that out there again. Finish my run here. Thank you to everyone. And I look forward to reading everyone's opinions in the chat.
Thanks, Alex.
I think there was a question from Ward about where the historic area is located on the map. And so are they easy to preserve without making redevelopment too onerous? And I think a lot of the existing structures are kind of on the periphery because the airfield was in the center of the site. So in terms of structures like the hangars, I think it's going to be not too difficult to preserve those without, your question was without making redevelopment too onerous, but it's a great question because, we're bringing a new future in new life. So we have to find the right balance of how to sort of respect and keep the traces of what's there. And I think there's a suggestion, that we respect the runways or somehow reutilize that geometry to indicate that this was an airfield. I think there's a control tower there. There's a huge water tower. There are a lot of indicators of airfield and the military history that are there and that we do intend to preserve regardless of whether they would become listed on a national register. They're just really interesting and unique and powerful in, kind of preserving that identity, but part of the new identity as well. So
Jana, if I could give this is Alex Toprak, and
Hi.
Following up Edgar's comment, and then also to maybe provide some additional insight into how what's going on next door can be incorporated in this project. And we can, of course, discuss this further at another point in time. But the Texas Historical Commission, at our last quarterly meeting, the commission decided we're in the process of allowing the developers next door to release part of the historic preservation covenant on the very large Naval Weapon Industrial Reserve plant buildings. And that was determined after many, many, many years of feasibility studies looking at potential tax credit use and just even, industrial / commercial use of those building spaces. And it really just has not been achievable by the developers. They were even offering 2 free years of lease
Wow.
to several large corporations that turned it down. And the good news is those buildings have had major issues with vagrancy and crime. There has been shooting there's been guns going off on site. There are people living in the large buildings, the 2 main buildings being over 20 acres of enclosed space each. Mm-hmm. And the release of the covenant does mean that site will be largely cleaned up. There will be, currently it's planned to have 2 of the hangars will be retained. And they're actually both currently in use by Home Depot, which is pretty exciting. That being said, there is potential overlap in these 2 projects that I would like to discuss with you further that could really kind of enrich the preservation side on the Hensley Field project, because we are looking for essentially mitigation as the exchange of removing the covenant.
Yes.
So I know there's a lot of jargon in there for everybody else that's listening, but in other words, the good news is that some of the concerns that we're hearing from the public, and particularly those who live in the area, is that there has been issues with the use of the space for a long time. And it's sort of serendipitous that Dallas is taking on this project at Hensley Field while we finally, after 5 years of negotiation, have made some headway next door. So I wanted to throw that out there for everyone, maybe get everybody a little bit more excited about what potential there is for the entire area, including the very large site next door. Mm-hmm. So I'll turn that back over to you.
Well, that's great to hear. Thank you so much for letting us know. And let's follow up on that later. But, it is hard to sort of say, well, the boundary of the Hensley Field property, that's the edge of the significance. It's, it's spread over various sites that are contiguous with the Hensley Field property. So it's a good thing to be aware of, that it's not as neatly contained in sort of the 700-acre property. So we'd like to talk to you some more about that. And we'll move on, though, to transportation and mobility, and wanted to introduce Anjali Tapia. She's with Fair and Pierce, transportation engineers and planners who've been really helping us establish a great multimodal transportation network for Hensley Field.
Yeah, thanks, Jenna. So as we think about transportation and mobility, we're thinking about access to and from the site, and we're thinking about the connectivity within the site as well. So this is a real opportunity to provide a high level of comfort for people walking and biking. And we want to make sure that we're providing multimodal streets as a result that are consistent with the Complete Streets Design Manual, and really provide connections to both the regional trail system as well as a destination walking trail around the lake. Overall, we want to provide a master plan that offers choices for the full spectrum of transportation modes, and that's flexible to respond to future trends that may emerge. We've already seen bike lanes start to accommodate slow mobility devices like e-scooters or e-bikes, and then autonomous transit is increasingly a part of the conversation. You're seeing an example of an autonomous transit vehicle in the bottom right corner there. So we want to make sure that what we're planning for is able to accommodate the full spectrum of modes and is still flexible for what may come. When we think about recommendations that have come out of our scenario evaluation, we have a handful that are broken down into two components. The first is just access to and from the site. So based on our analysis, we're recommending three signalized intersections off of Jefferson that would provide full access to and from the site, and then two right in, right out intersections in between. So those are locations that would be stop controlled and would only allow right turns out of the site or right turns into the site. Really overall, the goal is to maximize vehicular connections so that we can really reduce congestion and distribute trips effectively to the roadway network. As we look to Lake Crest and Hardy, those will provide key connections to the southwest, but still keeping in mind that we want to minimize impacts to the surrounding neighborhoods. So that's where a western connection to Skyline Road will also be key to the west, looking at a bridge that would allow vehicles to exit to the west from the site. And then there's always the possibility of future eastern roadway connections. Right now there are sites to the east, but as things redevelop, et cetera, perhaps there's opportunities for additional connections that would only help to further distribute traffic and vehicle trips to the roadway network. Looking at other modes, I know there's been some chat about transit already, and definitely as part of the preliminary recommendations, we want to coordinate with DART to plan a high capacity transit linkage, and that could mean bus rapid transit along Jefferson Street, or that could mean light rail transit. So in the visual that you're seeing on the left, where we were actually looking at a potential loop that would bring bus rapid transit in from Jefferson Street and loop through the site with a couple of stops that would look to provide people with access to transit within a short walk. We're also looking at opportunities for autonomous transit, looking at potentially a dedicated transit way that would ensure that all residents were within a 10-minute walk of transit. And looking at the map on the left, that's the kind of orange colored spinal street that you see running and connecting to the loop. Overall, we want to make sure that there's a network of slow mobility streets or protected bikeways within the network, not only to provide connections within the site, but also connecting to surrounding neighborhoods. So making sure that we're carrying that network of slow mobility streets all the way to the edges of the site. And lastly, all three scenarios that we looked at were emphasizing that complete streets design, which really just emphasizes a high level of comfort for pedestrians and bicyclists to really promote safety and walkability. So we'd love to hear your feedback on these preliminary recommendations for transportation and mobility. If you want to revisit that Mentimeter poll, we'd love to hear from you.
Did anyone have questions about Anjali's share that they want to share? I don't see any straight out questions in the chat, or we can also open it up for a more open discussion. All right, Anjali, was there anything you wanted to elaborate more on related to transportation and mobility, since we don't have much from our audience today?
Number of people expressing concerns. Love to hear their thoughts. I see six folks have questions or issues.
Yeah, I'm seeing the question about vehicular usage inside the site and regular car-bound neighborhood. I think the idea is that by ensuring that there's options and choices available, as well as an appropriate mix of uses that makes this a place that people want to live, work, and play. All of those things help to contribute to lower vehicle trips or reducing vehicle trips. In our assessment of scenarios, we look at the mix of land uses and how that can contribute to multiple trips in a common site, so that it's not necessarily it's not necessarily external trips to the site. It's all captured within, so that people are able to park once and get out and visit a few destinations. There's also the idea of what we call transportation demand management, which are key strategies for employers and residential areas that can promote alternative options to help reduce vehicle trips to and from the site. So I think all of those are in play here.
Somebody's asking a question about the timeline for DART access. I think we could say that we've been working with DART throughout the process, and that will probably be predicated on the level of ridership that we can generate on the site. Anjali, do you want to elaborate on any of that?
Yeah, I'll say that DART does have thresholds, what we call ridership thresholds, that they feel warrant high capacity transit, whether bus rapid transit or light rail transit. And that's based on the land uses and the densities that are planned for a given area. And so we've run some of those numbers for the Hensley Field site in our scenario evaluation. And on the good side, all three scenarios were able to meet that threshold to warrant high capacity transit to and from the site. So everything that's in our control, we are priming the site for transit. We are going to put the right things in place to create that demand that will, and then coordinating with DART at the same time will hopefully move us forward to providing that availability.
And we are, Mr. Ornstein has noted that we really need to also be working with the COG, and they're very much involved in this process in terms of transportation. We should move on to Gail Vittori, who's going to talk a little bit about our sustainability recommendations.
Thanks, Jim. So we have really derived a lot of information from this process, and we are presenting tonight 7 preliminary recommendations. They very much align with and advance the guiding principles that were outlined earlier, particularly environmental health, healthy communities, and mobility and access. In addition, they are really expressions of the commitment for the project overall to be, as Jana noted earlier, a laboratory of resilience. So we're excited about them. Just to go through them quickly, first, to establish Hensley Field overall as an eco-innovation district and a proof of concept of the CCAP. So there are so many ways that at this scale, it will be able to introduce state-of-the-art strategies that are implementable and financially viable. So we're very excited about that. And then as a subset of that, to really look at the peninsula, the Runway Peninsula, as an innovation village, to do that in partnership with a nonprofit or corporate sponsor, and to have that peninsula really serve as a demonstration project that will test state-of-the-art green infrastructure and emerging building technologies. And as you all might imagine, there's such a burgeoning of new information that is emerging in the marketplace. To have a dedicated piece of real estate to really put those into play and purposely be evaluating them to see what their opportunity is for larger scale applications. Third is to use environmental, social, and governance, or ESG criteria, as a basis to evaluate potential anchor uses. Many of you might be familiar with the ESG, which has really emerged as a key benchmark tool for corporations, small and large, local, national, and global players are using these as ways to really advance both what they're doing internally and to enable the broader population to have much more access in a transparent way of what's being disclosed in terms of their performance, not bottom line as we've conventionally thought about it, but on these other three tiers of performance: environment, social, and governance. Fourth, we have future proofing and resilience. Again, just a lot of opportunities to be ready for the changing climate that was referenced earlier. We've identified all buildings as being solar ready and also reclaimed water ready. Next is the LEED cities and communities. So just as Dallas has set requirements for their buildings within the city to achieve LEED certification, the LEED cities and communities certification will enable the city to align with that certification that encompasses many of these strategies at the scale of community. So we see that as really a valuable tool to both align and evaluate and assess performance. The final two, the district energy, geothermal cooling, and EV charging. These are, I'd say, huge opportunities, both of which are going to require more exploration. In terms of the geothermal cooling, looking at learning more really, including the financial viability of doing it at the scale, certainly of the entire development, perhaps more appropriately at the Innovation Village scale, and doing that in coordination with utility providers to really get a very clear understanding of both the benefits and also the cost. There's certainly potential there, but we want to be mindful of all the parameters that would be involved in making that significant investment. And then with EV charging as well, a lot of development and evolution of the technology. And that is going to be something I think to explore as we are needing to make decisions, see where the technology sits in terms of what's available in the marketplace, but certainly aligned with the overall mobility strategy to see EV charging network and EV autos and other types of vehicles as being part of the overall transportation reality for Hensley Field. So let's go to the next slide, which is really going to the Mentimeter to gauge what you all think about these recommendations, again, as preliminary ones. Love to have your feedback. Yes, embracing them fully, generally, but with questions. And then some of you may feel like there's more of a no. And look forward to your comments on the chat. There's a question about geothermal cooling. The heat pump based technology would be something that could be undertaken more in a building by building basis than a whole loop. And so there may well be the appropriateness for pursuing geothermal on an individual building scale, as opposed to making the much more significant investment to do it on the development as a whole.
I just wanted to pop in and add, I know we're getting pretty close to 7 o'clock, and that is when we were scheduled to end. So if you need to leave, we appreciate you joining us today, and we will follow up if we did not get your question answered. We will stay on to wrap up a few things through the end of the meeting, so you're welcome to stay with us.
I'm sorry, Ramp. This is Don. I think the Mentimeter is not. Oh, there it is. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Love to know for folks who have identified no, what your concerns are. If you care to share them.
I know that Sue brought up in the chat, she was asking about LEED cities and communities versus LEED, trying to find it, lots of activity. Sue, did you want to jump in?
Yes, I can. So LEED actually has kind of moved the bar, if you will, on their system. They currently have 3 different additional certifications available related to net zero. One is focused on water I guess, water
Right.
conservation. One is on energy and the other is on energy efficiency for buildings. And so I would suspect while you're looking at it on a community basis, I think we may want to explore the LEED Net Zero or similar certifications for the development as a whole.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Suze. And I believe in the context of LEED for cities and communities, you get some opportunities to contribute by having individual buildings within that community or city boundary as pursuing other LEED certifications. So LEED Zero, there's also the LEED Zero Water, and there's the True, which is for waste. Those are 3 different zero type of certifications, and we'll certainly be assessing those to kind of overlay at what scale are we able to take advantage of them. So we have a really nice composite and kind of a woven strategy at the different scales, but great point, thank you.
Well, and there's some other benchmarking programs out there. There are quite a few looking at living buildings,
right.
Which may be, you know, after our COVID adventures, maybe something we want to look at when we're building communities moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And Living Building Challenge has really evolved as well. There's something now called the Core, which is a more streamlined version of that. And then there's also Pedal certification. So agree, there's a nice array of certification opportunities. And I think we will be assessing and then making decisions on what's the best fit, and really look forward to your input.
I do think you have some really good potential to set up a microgrid with this project. Is the other thing that isn't really in there, but I think there's some good opportunities there, and it that whole community more resilient over time.
Yes, it's something that was touched on as we were exploring the various ways to be addressing utility opportunities, and microgrid was among them. I think the slide showed a kind of cutaway of something that would include on there on the bottom left, a microgrid.
Yeah,
so
I saw that.
Yes. Really appreciate your comments.
All right, I know we're running out of time, but are there anything that we have not talked about that people would like to raise? I know there were some things in the chat about the film studios. I don't know if anyone wants to speak specifically to that issue. I know there are outstanding questions on contamination. I want to emphasize that the City of Dallas and the Navy have reached a settlement agreement that the site will be cleaned up to residential standards. There is a process for doing that, and that process that we are told will not impede redevelopment of the site. So that is something that it's important. It's a challenge, but it is one that is being met by both the city and the Navy. Any other issues or questions we have not touched on that people would like to speak to? If not, I think Jenna is going to wrap up with next steps.
Okay.
Quickly, I'd love for you all to follow up with me both on the in-work potential opportunities, but then also regulatory implications, assuming that there might be need for a core permit somewhere in this project. I don't know that if that's the case, but always thinking ahead.
Thanks. Just gonna go to the next slide. I just wanted to give you a view of the next steps and where we are in the timeline, which you see from left to right at the top. We're here in October with the virtual public meeting that you see on the line associated with community outreach. What we're now heading toward, we've gone through most of the phases of the master plan. We're into the development of the master plan now. And I think, as Jim said, we're probably going to be, we're having our first draft completed close to the end of this year. And then we're developing, and we're very excited about this, a video that will help to introduce the project and provide insights into the recommendations. It'll be kind of a short, hopefully very interesting, engaging video that will help get people to take a look at the website as well. We'll probably have a follow-up, a survey about the final master plan recommendations. And then we'll be taking input with our SAG and TAG members as well before we head to council for hopeful adoption in the spring. So we can go to the next slide, please. And so the key milestones in terms of the community related facing is that draft master plan and the video. So early next year, getting the general public's comments on the draft master plan, probably January, February, and then submitting it to the city council in April. And so that's the end of the master plan, but it's certainly not just the beginning of the project and how it could get implemented. And so we've listed just a few dates below. If everything went really well and the city of Dallas decided to A, adopt the master plan, and then B, select a master developer. And Jim mentioned at the beginning that this is often the way that a big project like this is really coordinated and implemented and structured, is through the assistance of a master developer who's setting forth all the roadways and utilities, the mass grading, the parkland, et cetera. So that could happen as early as 2023. Usually there would be a selection and then a call for master development and developer interest, and then a selection process, and then a development of a very important document called the Master Development Agreement. And that can be 1 or 2 years of negotiation until that's finalized. And then perhaps as early as a year later, so we're talking 2025, probably in the earliest, you would see site preparation and earth being moved to start to implement the master plan. And so that's kind of just some kind of key ideas for what could happen after the master plan is adopted. But that's really kind of wraps up our evening tonight. And again, as MK was emphasizing, we're open for more questions, and please contact us. There's, we have a wonderful website that's just been sort of revitalized, and there's more information coming to it all the time. So I encourage you to go there to keep up. And I don't know, MK, if you have any closing comments.
I will say, so if you have a question in the chat that we have not gotten to, I ask you to please go to this contact page. I put the link in the chat, but I will add it again. That way we can get your email address and follow back up with you. We'd love to be in touch with you and answer all of your questions. But if we don't have your email, it's difficult to do that. If you have any other questions or anything else, we're going to be here for a little while and wrapping the meeting up. But that is it for me. And again, thank you all for joining us today. We've really appreciated your input.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, if that's all, I'll go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your evening. We appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.